So I'm going to start the process of swapping all the internals from the crashed bike's engine, or the crashed bike's head, into the bike that had the blown engine's head. This one just needs new intake valve guards, which I have right here, and the tools to install them, and new stem seals, valve stem seals. So I need to pull this thing apart and get the valves and the cam and all that stuff out, because I also need to check the clearance between the new intake valve guards I'm going to put in this and the valves I'm actually going to use. So I have the head off the bike and I've just got the motor sitting to the side right now. I just sealed up until I do a top end rebuild and replace the clutch with a Rekluse clutch and paint the cases and all that sort of stuff. I can't go too much further with dismantling the head because I still need a valve spring compressor. I'll probably go buy one of those tomorrow and then I'll be able to continue with this thing.
The next day.
So instead of buying a valve spring compressor, I just made one out of a G-clamp and some tubing I had lying around because I really didn't want to spend $150 on something I'm barely going to use. Other news that I found out is that they've sent me a 5.5mm valve guard reamer, and I needed a 5mm reamer. So they've sent me the wrong one. I've spoken to them. Hopefully they would get back to me and say they're going to send me the correct size. So I'll still be able to get the broken valve guards out of this head and put the new valve guards in, but I won't be able to ream them, which means I won't be able to put the valves and springs that I'm pulling out of that head into this one yet. So the new valve guards are in the head. That was a little bit fiddly because obviously I had to get it within 0.2 mil. So that went according to plan. I'm pretty glad that all worked. I was a bit nervous. Here's the old broken valve guards. So that focuses. You can see that when the cam skipped timing, it hit the valve and the valve bent, and the valve bending caused the actual valve guard to crack and break like that. While I'm waiting for the correct size valve guard reamer to come in the mail, I'm gonna install the Rekluse clutch. I've taken the cylinder off already because I've got a top end rebuild kit coming in the mail. So I just took the cylinder off, and I've got another cylinder over here that I've painted, as well as the alternator cover, water pump cover, and rocket cover. That'll closely match the Rekluse clutch cover. But yeah, so I've got all the clutch parts soaking right now, so they're ready to go in. The nice thing about these Rekluse clutches is that they come with these basket sleeves, and these just sleeve in right here where there's all this notching's happened on the stock basket. So you just slide all these basket sleeves in. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. There you go. And that eliminates that notching. Rekluse clutch is installed. I just got to rebuild the top end once that comes in the mail, ream the valve guide so I can finish off the head, and then it should all go back together. And once it's all back together, I get to throw it back in the frame and continue with the build.
2 weeks later.
The top end rebuild kit came in the mail, so I've just gone with the standard size Vertex kit. This thing looks pretty cool, so I'm going to install that now. The new Vertex piston and rings are installed, so now it's ready for the head to go back on. Finally, after 2 months of waiting for the correct size valve guide reamer to come, it finally came. So what I'll do now is I'll throw this in this T-piece from like a tap and die set, and then use this to ream these valve guides out to exactly 5mm. The valve guides are reamed. You can see the small amount of material that the reamer takes off just to get those clearances just right. So now all I gotta do is lap the exhaust valves. I can't actually lap the intake valves because they're titanium and they have like a coating on them, and if you lap them, it ruins it. So I'll just do the exhaust valves, get them seated properly, and then I'll test fit the intake valves, and if they don't seat, they don't seal, I can't lap them, so I'd have to take them to a machine shop. So I've got my fingers crossed, and I'm hoping that the titanium intake valves just seal, and I don't have to do anything to them. So the reason I'm lapping the exhaust valves because they have a little bit of pitting. It's hard to really show in footage, especially with the iPhone I'm using, but you can see those black marks around the perimeter of the valve there. So when I lap the valves, that'll get rid of that and make a proper seat. And just looking at the titanium valves, the one I can't actually lap, they don't have the same pitting. They've got some wear marks where they seat, but they're not actually pitted like the exhaust valves are. So hopefully the titanium intake valves seat properly first go, and I don't have to take the machine shop, and hopefully I can just get these exhaust valves lapped properly and then they seat, and then we'll be good to go. So I just checked the intake valves to see if they were seating, and thankfully they are. The way I checked was I just put the intake valves in, and I put the springs in, and then I sprayed carby cleaner into the intake port, and then held the head upright to see if any carby cleaner would come out from around the seating surface, and thankfully none did, so that indicates that they're actually seating quite well. That's the best test I can do because I don't have any means of like pressure testing it or anything like that, so I'm pretty happy with that, and that's a win because now I don't have to take it to the machine shop. So now all I got to do is lap these exhaust valves, and I'll test to see if those are seating, and then we can continue on and put the motor back together. So I've just got the head taped up, just so the grinding paste that I use doesn't go everywhere that it doesn't need to be. I only want it on the valves and the valve seats. And I've obviously marked left and right, just so I don't mix up which side and which valve I've ground to which seat, because they have to be matched to the side you lap them at. So I'll get started. So I'll put the valve grinding paste on the valve seating surface. You don't need a lot, just enough to cover the seating surface on the valve itself. This is probably a bit much. It's definitely too much, but that's okay, because I'll just clean up what doesn't get used later. You need to keep the underside of the valve clean, because that's where this suction cup, so basically I suction cup this to the valve and then turn it while it's in the head to grind that seat out, and I need to keep this surface clean, otherwise the suction cup won't grab. And you just want to grind until that pitting that I showed you earlier disappears. So here's what a valve looks like after it's been lapped. As you can see, all that pitting that was on the face of it before is gone, so they should seat pretty well now. is a screwdriver and some Vaseline. And the Vaseline is just to hold the keeper on the screwdriver while I try and fiddle it in the head. The Vaseline's petroleum based, so once the engine starts, it'll disintegrate with the oil. So to be even more sure that these valves are seating, I put the spark plug back in and I'm going to fill this combustion chamber area full of carby cleaner, and if it starts to leak out the exhaust port or the intake port, then I'll know there's a leak for sure. I've tested it twice now the same way, so I'll test it once more with the spark plug in from the top side, from the combustion side out, and we'll see if it leaks. So I've got the combustion chamber side of the head filled up with brake cleaner. It's kind of hard to see, so I'll shine the light. So it's full of brake cleaner. I can't see any bubbles coming up that would indicate like a severe leak. I don't see any wetness in the exhaust port. And I also don't see any wetness in the intake port. I'm gonna put the head back on the motor now, but before I do that, I'm gonna spray the new head gasket that I've got with some copper gasket cement. And this is basically just like, this will put a layer of copper over the gasket, and that gives it like even more of a chance of sealing properly. It's going to give it an even better seal. So the engine's back together. I checked all the valve clearances and they're out of spec, which is to be expected after doing a head rebuild like I have. So I've measured all the current shims and the clearances, and then took those measurements down to the local bike shop. Got some valve shims, so I'll throw these in now and double check the clearances, make sure they're all good.
A few moments later.
All the valve clearances are now in spec. Now it's time for this thing to go back in the bike. I'm so stoked the engine's back in the bike. That's a huge milestone for this build. I can now put it back in all the wiring, the throttle body, put the radiators on, all the hand controls can go back on now. I've got so many parts just waiting for this motor to be in, and now I can finally use them and put them back on. It's really going to progress quite quickly from here now.